Welcome to the Easy Speak Speakeasy.
You've unlocked the door to unfiltered mental health and wellness conversations.
Yeah.
New set, who this?
New set, who this? Yes. Cheers to our new set.
Cheers to our new set.
Yes.
That's so exciting.
This is what a speakeasy is all about.
Yes.
You don't know where we're going to be.
You never know. And you never know if you're going to get the address of it either.
Mm-hmm. You don't know who's coming, who's going to be there, or where it's going to be.
That is yummy.
Coconut margaritas.
Delicious.
Check Easy Sips.
Yes.
For the recipe.
That is so good.
Highly recommend.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really good.
This might be one of our last summer drinks.
It's true.
Rounding down August.
We are. Kids are back in school.
Mm-hmm.
Transitions are happening. And boy, can we feel the transitions in the air. Just, the energy is just full of change.
Energy.
Energy. What's that? That's a Beyonce song?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Girl.
I knew that. So
Is that Beyonce?
Is that Beyonce? It must be. Well, yeah, I think I'm like starting to get a little more used to our new space here, so that's
It's
good.
cozy.
It is cozy.
Yeah.
It is cozy.
I like it.
Yeah.
We're like really in each other's face.
I know.
I like it.
We're right here.
I can check out what you did for makeup. And vice versa.
Which is basically nothing. That's a whole different story. Not for today, but
Same. I was like, humidity, braid, thanks. Lip gloss.
puff.
That's it.
That's it.
There's nothing else to be said.
No, it's so
because if I try to do my hair or makeup in the humidity, it 100% affects my mental health.
Oh yeah.
To the max.
Oh yeah. It's so frustrating. Nothing stays where you put it.
No.
Everything's constantly moving.
Yeah. It just like melts away. I'm
Yeah.
like, what just happened? I literally just went to wash my hands. I come back and it's like, it looks like I just got out of the shower. I'm like, oh, this is a sexy moment.
Oh my god.
Can't wait to go outside when there's no air conditioning.
I know. I went to my parents' house the other day and I had like just like moisturizer on and like tinted moisturizer, I think. And it was so humid that by the time I got there, like I had like a sheen on my face. And my mom was like, oh, glowy for summer? And I was like, if that's what we want to call it. It was matte when I left the house.
You're like, also, can I have some of those oil pads?
Those things are the best.
They are.
They work so well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you can just put them right in your purse.
I love those little purse things.
Blot, blot.
Yeah.
So good.
So good. So good. So, speaking of my parents' house, I'm making my way to the topic at hand today.
Wrapping
it all the way around to the topic. Okay. So, I was trying to figure out, like, what should we be talking about on the episode today? Like, what is it that we need to, like, discuss? I mean, there's so many, like, different topics at hand. But going to my parents' house, I was having, like, a moment of nostalgia, just, like, remembering driving from their house, what used to be my childhood home, to my high school, which was a Catholic high school. And then I started going down the nostalgia road around how, like, I used to, I went to school, Catholic school.
Is that okay?
Can we just...
It'll be fine.
Okay.
I just need to yell at them for a second. No one, Ezra! Be quiet! Please! Love you. It's okay.
Can you hear us both equally, by the way?
Yes. So we're just working out the kinks of our new space here.
Working out the kinks.
Working out the kinks.
Kink one.
Kink
kids.
One, kids. 2 kinks. So I was just like thinking, like, I do a lot of work with like Catholic people, Catholic schools in particular, and just how much there's an interplay between religion, faith, mental health, and even just thinking about my own journey from, going and getting my first communion as a Catholic, right, to now where I'm like, I have crystals in my bra as we speak. Like, that's a completely different way of, kind of being and operating in the world. And I know that, my trajectory and, the way that I've come to become a lot more spiritual versus religious has been like such an important aspect of maintaining my mental health. So that's how we came to the topic of today.
Yeah. And I think, I remember when I first started working with families, and there was this assessment that was like it wasn't a clinical assessment, it was more of like a family voice type of assessment, and kind of pulling out the areas of strengths for families.
Yeah.
And one of those areas was faith. And I remember that I was supervising other staff, and this was an area that they used to always struggle with asking people about.
Oh, interesting.
And I used to say to them, like, most people have some sort of faith, belief, practice.
Yeah.
Or maybe they say, like, they have some sort of spirituality, or, there's some sort of answer. There are people, of course, that are agnostic or atheists, or, there's lots of different things. But typically, like, I think at the time, and this was many years ago, I'm not going to date myself too much, but the research was like at least 83% of people identified some kind of faith as being a driving force in their life. And so I would always say, like, to not ask that question and talk to families about what their faith belief is, then include that as part of family voice, is a huge miss. If you think potentially 83% of the people that we talk to, this is a way to help them deal with, cope with the things that are happening related to their kids' mental health needs, or what they're going through themselves related to their kids' mental health needs. So I think talking about faith and having an open conversation about it is so important in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also know that from a mental health standpoint, I think basically what you're saying is that it's a protective factor, right? So, in previous episode, we talked a lot about suicide and, self-harm and things of that nature. And that's actually one of the things that we know is a protective factor for people in their mental health is their faith, their belief in something bigger than themselves, right? And it can bring people a lot of comfort and a lot of joy, and community, right? Oftentimes when we're religious, that might also mean that we attend services or, go to a certain place to practice that religion. And of course that comes with community and resources. And so there's so many amazing aspects of it. And, I can't lie though, one of the first things that came to my mind in thinking about this particular topic was some of the work that we've done to kind of help people in certain faith communities to understand mental health. Because much like, we work a lot in the medical field to help people to understand, mental health from a family perspective, there's that like teaching still that needs to be done in some areas around, just understanding the intricacies of mental health and when something is like a clinical issue versus something that can be, overcome simply through practicing that religion, right? And so I think we often come up against that, like, rub where it's like, you can't pray away your depression sometimes, right? Like sometimes you need to do something that's outside of that realm to be able to get yourself out of a dark place. And I think because of the stigma that's come along with mental health, I think that it's very much alive and well, like we say, but like especially in some religious communities, I think it can be really challenging to be a person who's struggling with the mental health, and to be amidst people who don't really understand it.
Yeah, definitely. I think this reminds me of one of our earlier episodes where I talked about that like parable where somebody was, on an island like praying for Jesus to save them, and like a boat came along and they were like, I'm waiting for Jesus. And then a big ship came along and they're like, I'm waiting for Jesus.
Right.
And then they die and go to heaven, and they're like, Jesus, why didn't you save me? He's like, I sent you a boat and a ship.
Right.
Why didn't you get on it?
Right.
And I feel like that sometimes in religion, right? That we have these religions that have, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say rules, because I just want to generalize across a lot of different religions, but ways that they practice, different beliefs that come within it. But I think these things all like work together. I always think about like how we have a toolbox. We talk about people having their like toolbox of things that they use when they're advocating for their kid, or their toolbox of things that they use when it's time for self-care. And so this is like another piece, I think, of the toolbox related to mental health, is that faith and prayer and all of those things I believe are absolutely something that are part of a journey, especially for somebody who's very connected to their faith or God, source, higher being, however people refer to it. Him, her, it, they, them. So I think that it's really an interwoven kind of idea. And to try to have an open mind, it has been challenging. Like, we've gone to places churches where we've talked about mental health, and we knew going in like some of the statistics around especially adolescents, and that so many adolescents by the age of 14 have heard enough negative messaging around mental health that by the age of 14 they feel like their church is no longer a place where they would go to seek support related to their mental health. And so I think that's like where we really want to try to work with faith communities around how we can support better messaging. Because we are losing a lot of kids. Suicide rates are up, and there are a ton of kids that have died by suicide that were connected to church communities, and you hear these stories, once they've died, that they were these great kids and were involved in all these things and part of their church, but they still felt like clearly that there wasn't some sort of an outlet. And so how can we help to like bridge that gap and help people see that their faith is a place that they can go, and help leaders to understand that sometimes the language that they're using isn't like translating to different people.
Exactly. I think that's, and that can be challenging because, for a long time that was enough, I think, right? And I think that's something to acknowledge, is that like, as the world shifts and as cultural influences shift, and as we are being exposed to more and more violence and just tragedy and, global warming, like there's just so much that, we're all having to contend with, that inevitably it also means that we might need something extra to mitigate it, right? And so, when I'm having conversations with people around this kind of a thing, I always like to validate, that like, yes, at one point in time, like, people didn't have so many things to worry about. And so they could go to church on a Sunday and feel rejuvenated, feel like their cup got filled up, and that was all that they needed for the most part, right? And there were, youth groups and ways to keep the youth involved, but more and more it's challenging to really capture the attention of our youth and maintain it, especially when there's so much competing things for their attention, their time, their energy. And a lot of times the things that we're competing with are things that are also directly affecting their mental health, right? And so, I think just kind of like, understanding and realizing that religion and spirituality has a role to play, But just like we've said with everything else, it's not the only thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that we need to kind of look at other ways that we can help to maintain our mental health and our well-being, in addition to whatever our spirituality practices are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, kids are inundated with extracurricular activities, with social media, with hanging out with their friends, with just all of the things that are happening.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really hard for faith communities to compete with that.
Yeah.
You know, they oftentimes just the basics, like, don't have the budget to be able to, like, week after week put on, like, an event that is gonna, like, capture kids, you know, and it can be, you know, kids are changing, you know, as they grow and develop, and so at different times they're more involved in thinking about their faith maybe than at other times. And I think as human beings, we all have that. Like, I know myself, I was raised Catholic, and I've been on, like, what I consider an ongoing faith journey in my life, and it's been really eye-opening to me. Like, I've spent some time in different types of church communities, and I've learned different things, and, you know, I've really taken a lot about that. From that, like, I believe in God, and I believe in Jesus, and I also believe in witches, and I don't think that witches are the devil, right? Like, I think that they're a part of, like, the earth that God created, and that they're, like, people who really understand, like, the inner workings of the actual core of the earth, and, like, how to work. I believe in energy healers, and that all of these things are, like, the same, right? But that over time, you know, people got segregated into different religions, and like power struggles, and, like, you know, we could go into a long conversation about, like, what has happened with religions over time, and how we know and what we know. You know, I think every religion and faith has a bit of the piece of the puzzle, right? You know,
agreed.
And that's not just places that worship in a house of worship, right? Whatever that looks like. I think it's also, like, the people who energetically understand what's happening around us, and who understand, like, the soils of the earth, and the herbs, and the trees, and, like, all of these things. Like, to me, this is all part of, like, faith and spirituality, and, like, it's all one thing. So it's interesting, like, as I've been on a faith journey, that when I get into spaces where I start to hear, like, about a particular group being, like, quote unquote demonized, or as outsiders, that's usually, like, my cue that's like, maybe it's time for me to go and check out, like, the next place. Because I'm like, I don't really like that.
I reached my limit.
I'm like, I don't like that. You know, I like to be in places where it's very open, and people can express themselves without feeling judged. You know, my belief is, like, I feel like at the core of most, like, faiths is the idea that, like, God or source or spirit, or however people refer to it, is love.
You're right.
And at the core of love, like, isn't judgment, and like exiling people and turning people away, and all of those things. So that's usually when I'm like, well, maybe I'm gonna go explore Judaism now. And I move on to, like, the next thing, which is actually what I've been kind of interested in lately, is Judaism.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said. You know, for me, it's, like, really simple, and I think we overcomplicate it with, like, human bias. Essentially, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, as you were talking, I could hear that Lauryn Hill song, like, everything is everything. Like, it's just, like, it's so true. Like, we you know, to live a human existence means that we have to try to make sense of things, and once we do that, like, I think humans are just, like, we have these big brains that do really well at overthinking things. Like,
totally. Our brains are so good at filling in the gaps with negativity.
Right. It's like, you don't even need to, like, the gaps could be a thing. Like, it doesn't need to be filled with anything.
You can be in, like, a sense of unknowing.
Yeah.
And it'd be okay.
And it's fine. And, like, because we know at the core, like you said, everything is love, everything is acceptance. Like, it's all just the same thing, but kind of like a prism, you know, reflected out in different ways. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so that for me is probably why, like, opposite of you, instead of like going on a journey of like exploring different religions, I'm like, I saw the common thread, you know, in all of them, and I was like, okay, got it. And I'm like, I'm gonna go do my own thing now, and like figure out what works for me in terms of my practices, right? And so, like, you know, some people call it prayer, I call it manifesting, you know, some people call it, you know, going to church, I call it like going to my altar, you know, at home, and like, you know, some people call it talking to God. I'm like, I'm gonna write a list of exactly what I want, and I'm gonna sleep on it under my pillow for a month and see what happens. And like, you know, it's all the same thing. It's just figuring out what resonates with you and your soul. And I think, you know, that can be really powerful to, you know, kind of understand. And I think sometimes when we think about things within the scope of like religion, that's where we start to create those boundaries, you know, those arbitrary boundaries that inevitably, you know, I think in a lot of instances for people, you start to get a little uncomfortable because life doesn't happen within those boundaries. And you know, when the response is, okay, like, it's, you know, what you need right now isn't within this box, you know, so you need to figure it out. Like, I feel like that's a different approach than like, you know, this isn't going to fix all of it, but this is going to help. And like, let's figure out, you know, what other things we need to be putting in place to take us to the place we want to be, which is healthy, happy, loved, accepted.
Yeah, which is such a parallel process to like figuring out what works for you with mental health.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
It's so true.
How do we, what works best for me, like, is going to a therapist online versus in person better, or like, do I do better when I have something that comes up for me and I go to like a group, like a grief group, or like a group for like AA, or, you know, like I feel better like in community with others who like understand me, or, you know, is my mental health tied to the physically, like moving my body and like getting to the gym and those sorts of things. And I think this is sort of like a parallel process. It's like you have to figure these things out, like, and I believe all of that is like, you almost come up with the own like spiritual practice of your life. You know, like it's like your own like way that you're the own song of your life, like how you like dance through life and make it through with like a faith journey, and how you deal with your mental health, and that I think then impacts how you show up at work, how you interact with your kids, how you are able to manage stress, because you're like really taking the time to be introspective about what's really working for you, instead of like having the blinders on and just like moving it along, and then it's like all of a sudden you're like hit the brick wall and you're like, oh no, I haven't been paying attention to anything.
I've just been going and going and going and going
I don't
until
understand.
I crash.
And then you're like, why can't I get off the couch? I don't understand why I'm so tired.
It's so true. It's so true. I mean, I guess what we're basically saying is that, like, just like with everything else with mental health, it's kind of inextricable. Like, you can't separate the two. Like, you know, it's almost, you know, mental health is, we've said this before, it's ubiquitous. There are so many things that affect our mental health, including our spiritual journeys, our faith-based, you know, practices and things of that nature. So it's really actually pretty fascinating. I love that thought that it's like kind of a parallel process of like, You know, because even in my mind, I was kind of separating them out a little bit, I think, just because it didn't feel natural for it to be the same thing. But like, really, now I think about it, like, it's the same thing. It's just a different way of operating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even like, you know, tonight is like a super blue moon.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And like, I already
In
have
Pisces, super emotional. I hope everybody has tissues at home.
Are you planning on having a whole crying letdown situation later?
No, I hope not. But I definitely have felt like amplified. I'm also a Cancer, so like, you know, astrology is part of my spiritual path. So we often talk in astrology language, right?
We're always like, look at that Leo Taurus situation.
It's always a situation. Always. It's so true. Like, yeah, and so, just, hold on. It's going to be okay. And it's Mercury retrograde soon, right? And so, like, I was just having this...
By, like, tomorrow, I think there's going to be, like, 6 or 7 planets that are in retrograde.
Yeah, so I'm putting on my seatbelt, putting on my spiritual helmets, carrying my protection crystals. But, like, I feel like sometimes...
I know, I was lining mine up today. Yeah. I was like, I need to put more things on.
Yeah. I was like, spray, crystals in the bra, crystals on the ears, like, crystals in the car, crystals everywhere. But, like, I feel like sometimes when I talk that way, I still have people in my life who are like, you can't really, like, truly believe that. And I'm like... But I do. Yeah. And then I've realized that I've had to start finding ways to, like, again, like, we're all saying the same thing. We're just saying it differently, right? So how do I explain astrology to someone who thinks I'm just being kooky, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, perfect example, like, the moon affects the ocean tides. This is scientifically proven, right? When it's a full moon, the ocean does different things versus when it's a new moon and there's no... the gravitational pull is different, right? And then I'm like, how much... you're human, right? Like, how much of you is made up of water? Right? And then when they and then it's like, oh yeah, there must be an effect that the moon has on us, right? Like, duh, right? So there's like some, that's what I'm finding lately is that, like, again, we're all saying the same thing. Like, some people call it Mother Nature, other people call it God, right? Like, we're all talking about the same thing, just in different languages. Yeah. Yeah.
I love talking about astrology.
Me too.
I can't wait for the full moon tonight.
I know.
I'm like gonna just do all the thing. I'll be setting off the fire alarms in here with my sage.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I have a friend staying with me for a few days and I have like this great book about astrology. And this morning she was reading about her husband's sign, and he is Aries, and he's a science guy. So like whenever I'm at their house, he's always like, here you go. Like whenever I say anything, he's like, he'll look around and go, are the fairies coming in the room? Like he can't wait. Like he's like, what? And so she's like reading and she's like, this thing is spot on. And I was like, you should take those pages to him. Really mess with his mind. And let him come up with answers for all of them.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love it.
She's like, this is so accurate.
I love when people start becoming believers too, because like, you get around me long enough, you'll start to be like, I've had people be like, is Mercury in like lemonade or whatever? And I'm like, you know exactly what the terminology is.
You're like, you're only asking me that because you couldn't get your TV to turn on this morning.
Exactly. And then I have to be like, actually, we are in the shadow phase of Mercury retrograde, so buckle up, buttercup, because the next few weeks are going to be just like that, you know? And it's like, you can't make that up. Like, it's just inevitably, you know?
And I sort of feel like if you are a person of faith or spirituality and you have some belief around how creation happened, like, and you just look, I mean, just look around,
look at your room.
The way that like the universe is completely like scientifically,
Yeah.
mathematically
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, like the petals on each flower has 8 petals. Like, what?
Yeah, like like even if you look at the human body, like it is absolutely wild.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Or looking at or thinking about like astrology, right?
Yeah.
So if you believe in the creation story, or some belief about how we got here,
Yeah.
then that includes the sun, the moon, the
Yeah.
stars, and this, that, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
now you're talking about like if you think about constellations,
Yeah.
like these stars,
Yeah.
which are balls of gas,
Yeah.
have been completely aligned in these exact patterns, like for all of
centuries.
days,
Yeah.
right? And it's like that's
just
a pretty amazing thing to happen.
Yeah.
For it to just be like, meh.
You know who I would love to talk to is like a true atheist. Like, because as you're speaking, like I feel like most people can be like, I don't know, like obviously something bigger than me created all of this. Like, even the most staunch non-believers of astrology or whatever, like you ask them, well, even with like the creation story, the Big Bang, like you ask enough questions of like, how did that happen? How did that happen? What happened? How did that? And inevitably they get to a place where they're like, like there's an energy source, something, right? But like I don't know, I've never been able to like understand like an atheist perspective. Like
I think not a lot, but a fair amount of people that are deeply embedded in science are atheists, or maybe agnostic might be a better way.
Agnostic, atheist is like anti-religion.
Yeah, agnostic is that they just don't have a belief.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I think atheist is like against
they don't believe in God. Atheist.
Yeah. But yeah, it's really interesting to have conversations with people who are in like the science world, because they look for those. Where's the end point? Like, how do you get to the answer?
Yeah.
And so there's a mystery around faith.
Yeah.
And there's interestingly still so much mystery around mental health.
Yeah.
We've learned so much.
Yeah.
But we still don't know a lot. We don't know so much about the workings of the human brain.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the reasons why I came into this field, is because I was just like, oh my gosh, there's so much yet to be discovered.
Yeah.
And selfishly I was like, there's so much that I could just like make a path for me because nobody's discovered. But then like also it's just like mind boggling. Like like we said before, there's no brain scan to detect a mental health challenge. There's no blood test. There's nothing that can give you a definitive answer for mental health. And I think it's kind of inherent in the conversations we've been having that it's just like inextricable from our human existence, and there's so many factors that play into it that coming up with one test is not gonna cut it.
Right. And I think this is also sometimes where in faith communities it can sometimes go a little bit astray, because there isn't that like, oh, you can go and get this test and you 100% have bipolar.
Right.
It's a little bit, it feels a little bit like faith, right? And so I think like in faith communities, a lot of times things that can't be explained fall into like these categories of like good and evil. And a lot of times people see outward mental health needs as evil because they're atypical behaviors. They're not quote unquote normal. The person doesn't want to get out of bed, or they may have an external like behavioral situation, or may have times of aggression or uncontrollable crying, or whatever it may be. And so I think that's how like in faith communities that often gets put into the bad or demonic or other kind of category, because it doesn't seem like, when it's something that's like unable to really be explained, then it doesn't look like what is of God, right? And so I think that's where it starts to like go down the line in faith communities.
It's so crazy because I think I said earlier, like I do a lot of work with Catholic schools, and a couple of years ago I actually visited a school that still in that like community, that the parish community, they still performed exorcisms, which I thought were like Emily Rose, like 1800s, like nobody's doing exorcisms anymore, surely. But like that is
well,
still
clutch your pearls, girl.
I was like that is so much work for me to help you to come from exorcism to 2022.
Were you first initially like, I actually have to witness an exorcism?
Well, I asked about the details. I was like, what does it entail? And they were like, it sounded like they were talking about that movie. What's that movie with the girl?
The Exorcist?
Yeah, The Exorcist. I'm like, what's that movie?
What's that movie about the exorcisms?
The way they
right on top of that rose.
The way they described it though, like I felt like I was watching the movie. It was in such vivid detail. They talked about lights flickering, like the building was shaking, like that the girl was tired days after, and you know, I also like
I actually don't want to be around that energy.
I also was like, I was very fascinated because at first I was appalled. I clutched my pearls, but then I was also like, see, but like what they're talking about is like energy being moved and being wielded by somebody who's an energetic master.
Yes.
Right? And like this is what's happening in the room, and we're calling it an exorcism, but like that energy is being used to push
but
out.
You're like, hello, Reiki master.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, hello, like maybe we can channel this in a more positive direction.
Yeah.
And like, you know, that poor kiddo, like I feel for them because I just know that must have been like such a traumatic experience, because the energy is like, get that out of them, right? Versus like, let's heal the wounds, right? Which is like what Reiki does, right? And so I just thought that was so fascinating. I was like, I really wanted to work with that school because I wanted to like make sure that we could kind of move in a better direction. And the fact that they were like calling in for help was a good sign, right? They realized that like that girl wasn't healed after that. Like she was still struggling, and maybe even more so.
Yeah. They were like, hello, Diana. We don't have enough staff to do exorcisms. So we're going to go down this mental health thing you're talking about. Thanks.
The way they talked about the priest who did this, by the way, they're like, he's the best exorcist this side of the Rockies or something. And I was like, oh my God, like, who is still, how do you learn?
You're like, I'm on my way with my selenite.
Listen, you think I'm stacked today. I had my whole collection with me.
I know you walked in there like swinging
a pendulum, like they think it's incense.
That crystal's so big, like Flavor's clock. You're like, guess what time it is? It's energy on time, baby.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, I would love to, witness an exorcist in training. So if any of you know where
you want an all call for this
to go, I would love to be a part of this. I'd like to see and learn and understand it, because I feel like I said, I feel like the people who do this, like the true, like what they're describing with this dude who came in and the lights were flickering, this girl was like writhing, and it was like a whole thing. Like that's an energy master, and like
totally,
I would love to have that skill and use it for good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought
that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it was very wild. It's very wild. Being like stunned for a few days, like,
yeah,
what year? And it was in the middle of COVID, so I was already all Like time.
You were
meant
like, I don't
nothing.
even know what's happening anyways.
Space meant nothing.
Yeah.
And like people are doing exorcisms. I'm like, all right.
Time
like,
still hasn't returned correctly to me since the pandemic.
Me either.
I'm just like, I don't know what's happening.
What day
People
it
show
is.
up, I'm like, oh, podcast time. Perf. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's shake up these margs,
Yeah.
baby.
I think, as a society, we're having a little tough time transitioning back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Quote unquote.
quote unquote.
There have been some upsides, though.
Yeah.
I love that, like, the stores aren't open all the time.
Yeah.
Like, for the people that work there.
Yeah.
Like, why did you have every single grocery store open
Till
all
11
night
p.m.
long?
Yeah.
Like, for why?
Yeah.
Do people need Cheetos this bad?
Yeah.
I think it's all right.
Yeah, I think they'll be okay till the morning.
Like, you know, like,
Yeah.
we used to, like, survive just fine with, like, one store that was open 24 hours.
Right.
If you needed something in an emergency.
Yeah.
But, like,
Yeah.
even if you work, like, an overnight shift, like, it's called Instacart. Like, you can have your groceries
I know.
delivered to your door when you arrive home at 7:20.
I know.
The Instacart guy pulls in right behind you.
I know. I love Instacart.
Me too. I'm like,
Shout out
oh
to
yeah,
Instacart.
my apples are here, baby.
Sponsor us.
It's the best.
Send us some stuff.
Sponsor us.
Sponsor us.
Well, I think we've been around the world and back
Yeah, we have.
on this one.
Yeah.
I do
Such a good
think
topic.
it's important for people to hold on to their faith or spirituality or whatever that is.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to explore other things if that's what you feel called to.
Yeah.
Or engage in conversations with the leaders in your church if you feel like your needs aren't being met there.
Yeah.
And remember that, you know, Jesus sends the ship and the boat and the other things. And
Yeah.
it's not just always one way.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes a team and a process and a number of different ways, I think.
Some crystals and some incense and some sage.
Yeah. Live this time we have on this rock to the fullest.
Yeah.
Figure out all the answers you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review.
Yes.
And
Check out our shorts, our
Yes.
easy shorts, which are only on YouTube
yeah,
every other week.
they're super fun.
Super fun. And I think that's all the things for today.
And we're out.
Bye.
Be good, folks.